We're bringing you boots on the ground insight from the ranchers, conservationists, and partners who are helping to preserve the best of the Golden State for generations to come. Join the California Rangeland Trust for inspiring stories of resilience, innovation, and hope as we get tuned into the land.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Tune Into the Land. I am your host and CEO of the California Rangeland Trust, Michael Delbar. At the Rangeland Trust, we often talk about the importance of conserving California's working landscapes. But a key piece to that is preserving the stories of the people who steward them. Ranching families carry with them generations of knowledge, resilience, and tradition. And if those stories aren't shared, they risk being lost. That's why we were honored to take part in the creation of Roots and Resilience, California Ranchers in Their Own Words, a book that brings together the voices of ranching families from across the state through a collection of stories, poems, and essays. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Susan Marshall, Emeritus Professor of Rangeland Resources and Wildland Soils at Cal Poly Humboldt and the editor of the book. Susan was the driving force behind this project. Her vision, passion, and persistence are what brought Roots and Resilience to life. We'll talk about her inspiration for the book, the editing journey, and her hopes for the future of ranching stories in California. Later in the episode, we'll also hear from rancher and contributor Jessica Schley, who will share her family story and, as a special treat, read an excerpt from her piece in the book. So settle in as we dive into Roots and Resilience. So with that, I want to welcome Susan Marshall to the podcast. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning, Michael.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background and your role at Cal Poly Humboldt?
Yeah, I got to Cal Poly Humboldt in 1996. Actually, I spent a sabbatical leave replacement semester there in 89. So I taught there for about 27 years. I'm still involved at Cal Poly Humboldt. We just went through and got Society for Range Management accreditation, which is awesome. And working on this Roots and Resilience project, and also working on some extension classes that will help people become certified rangeland managers in California. So I'm retired, but still involved. Let's put it that way.
That's great. And that SRM part of that is pretty special too. Congratulations. What got you interested in rangeland management to start with?
Yeah, I'm one of those folks that came from a urban background. I grew up 10 miles as the crow flies east of downtown Los Angeles, but my dad was a teacher and took us on extensive road trips every summer, and including to our cousins in South Dakota who raised small grains and now sunflower. And my grandparents were on the property and grew food. And when I was a little kid, the neighborhood had horses, and, it was still had a rural feel to it. You can grow anything in Southern California. And I saw a lot of change as I was growing up down there. But then when I went off to college at UC Riverside, I took botany classes and soils classes. And I had an epiphany that range management put together not only soil science and botany, but people and animals too. And so I went to University of Arizona and got a master's degree in rangeland management. And that was awesome. It was a really good experience at U of A.
You've seen quite a bit of change down in Southern California.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yeah.
What role do you see ranchers playing in the stewardship of our rangelands? Obviously, you've seen a lot of change down in Southern California, the work that we're doing to try to protect what's left. What role do you see ranchers playing in that?
Well, I think that as a scientist, I really value the long-term ecological sites around the country that exist. But I think ranchers and ranching families hold an incredible ecological record, both throughout seasons, as seasons change, and also through generations. And understanding those fluctuations in plant growth, animal cycles, et cetera, is really, really valuable. And the long-term experimental stations get to some of that, but we have an ecological record in many cases that goes back generations. So that's one piece of it. The other piece, of course, that's very near and dear to the California Rangeland Trust is the preservation of open space. I think Californians really value that. We probably don't have enough of it, but I appreciate what CRT is doing to help maintain and preserve those open spaces through working lands approaches.
Yeah, it's one of our board members, Clayton Copeman, which I know you know as well, has stated, and it's absolutely true, is these open spaces aren't just open spaces. They're there because they are the economic backbone of someone's hard work. And that open space is really working lands, and that private land ranchers out there stewarding that, providing that open space along with wildlife habitat, clean air, clean water, and of course, food and fiber production. So it's more than just open space. And that's really important for folks to understand.
I agree with you 100%.
So in your role as a professor, you have used the book Homeland.
Yes.
And tell us what role that book played in your classroom, as well as then how that sparked the idea for Roots and Resilience.
Yeah. What we tried to do when I first started teaching this class, I quickly realized that the majority of students that were coming to then Humboldt State University were not necessarily from ranching or rural backgrounds. And so when I first started, we had just maybe 30 students in the class. And to help bolster our enrollment numbers, we changed the class, Range 306, to a general education class. And that brought in a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds because they were taking it as a science class. And so I had business majors and art majors and English majors and plus, range majors, forestry, wildlife, and whatnot. And the Homeland book was included along with a range textbook and a plant book just to bring the human face to what rangelands are, to show through people's stories how they were working lands. And what happened was when we looked at the teaching evaluations at the end of the semester, many students said Homeland, we loved Homeland because it told stories. And what I also did, which I think was an effective teaching tool, when you're just, maybe in the old days, you just presented information and hoped that the students would retain that information. But Homeland really brought out a lot of passion in students. They saw the passion in the stories in the book. And in turn, I asked them to reflect back on their own experiences. So I got stories from kids whose families were in Mexico that were involved in the ranching business, from kids that were involved in charreria and escaramuza. And I also got stories from city dwellers whose only experience in the wide open spaces was maybe driving up 395 for the first time in the Eastern Sierra. I got stories back about the role of fathers, members of their family and what they did for the family. And that was it was just, when I graded these things, I was almost brought down to tears at times. But in the teaching evaluations, the students really enjoyed having that human part of the equation involved in a natural resource science. And so I really wanted to try to bring that back to California, to bring it. There were only a few essays maybe from California in that Homeland book. It was mostly Intermountain West. And so just to give you a little bit of background on how this book, Roots and Resilience, came about, Dan Macon and I were talking at the 2020 SRM meeting in Denver right before COVID hit. And we said, we got to do something like this for California. And so this book literally started with a handshake with Dan Macon in Denver, Colorado. And it took it about 5 years to get it out published, but it was worth the wait anyway. So Homeland definitely was the edited by Laura Pritchett. I want to acknowledge these folks: Laura Pritchett, Rick Knight, and Jeff Lee. Homeland really kicked it off, but we came up with something pretty unique, different, and wonderful.
I can't even imagine what some of those stories, feedback you got from your students. I mean, that must have just been incredible to read those. Was there any one story or comment from a student that still stands out to you?
I think, it's been a while since I've taught that class, but I think overall, you have this list of students that comes to you and you give them assignments. But when I ask them to reflect on the stories in Homeland, and we're in the process right now of creating similar prompts for Roots and Resilience. When you ask these questions, most, maybe half or most of the students kind of come back with a pat answer to the prompt. But some of them just really dive deep into their person, and I think it resonates with them. It makes the educational process more real. You're not just pouring junk out to them and expecting them to cough it back up. Some of the personal stories. Actually, I have a former student who has a ranch in Napa County, and her story that touched very deeply was about her grandmother. Her grandmother was her primary caregiver and mentor on her sheep ranch. And so some of the stories that she was one of the rare kids that actually came from a ranch, but I think stories about their family and how they brought these students eventually to study natural resources or something at Humboldt were the most touching. And I think the one kid, Gerardo, who is a forestry student, talking about his experience with charreria, which is Mexican performance on horses and trick roping and stuff like that, was very touching too. It made me realize that the significance of Humboldt being a Hispanic serving institution, part of what that brings to us is kids whose families are closer to agriculture because of their fairly recent arrival to the United States. They're closer to agriculture than many of our other students. And I appreciated that.
So you and Dan make a commitment to do a book, and you filled it with stories and poems and different media of stories from ranchers. How did you get folks to give you those stories, those submittals? Ranchers tend to be fairly private people, and telling stories is either very easy and they're very enthusiastic about it, and others are more reserved. How did you get folks on board?
Well, this is where I turned the question back on Michael Delbar, because creating Roots and Resilience was very much a collaboration. And Dan Macon and Valerie Elder, who was the executive director of the Buckeye at the time and now is guiding the forestry program at College of the Redwoods, and you, Michael Delbar, you were the folks that really reached out to people who you knew had talents for writing and who might have a story to tell. So I didn't do that much outreach. This was all on you guys, and I give you credit for that. And you came up with an amazing bunch of people whom I had never met and who I've been delighted to meet since the book came out. And the stories kind of fall into different categories. I think some of the stories are pretty purely family histories, which are interesting in their own right. Some of the stories, I call them all authentic stories of youth. For example, Penny Scribner Sampert and Marilyn Sagehorn Russell created delightful stories of their youth that were just wonderful. This isn't the stuff of artificial intelligence. This is really from the heart and from memories of women and men from, 60, 70, 80 years ago. Other stories, Dave Daly had written his story, I Cry for the Mountains and the Legacy Lost. That had been published previously. That's the only one in our book that had been published previously. And I think we wanted that in our book. And there was that story of fire and destruction really resonated with a lot of our rangeland audience and other folks as well. So in answer to your question, I didn't do the work. You guys did. And it came out with an amazing bunch of stories. family histories, recollections, and also some very unique and creative writing about loss, about tragedy, about joy in people's lives. So, yeah, you guys get the credit for this.
Well, Dave Daly's story was incredible, and telling that experience of that fire and what it was like to live through that and try to recover from that is pretty touching. Did you have a vision of what was going to be in the book, or did that evolve as the submittals came in?
I think what happened was we all agreed, largely with Valerie's argument, that this book should be a collection of writings. So that includes essays and poems from ranchers only. This is one place where Roots and Resilience is distinguished from Homeland, in that Homeland, yes, there were some ranchers and some rancher families, but there were also some stories by academics and so forth. And so while I was tempted to invite some of our very talented extension folks and educators to submit stories, we decided early on, again, you, Michael, Dan Macon, Valerie Elder, and an editor here from Humboldt, to make it only ranching families. And then I think when the stories started coming in, we figured out how to separate them into the title, Roots and Resilience. And we kind of figured out that there were themes in the book. So Roots covered a lot of the family stories, recollections, and then transitions were sort of intermediate. And then Resilience was how people are working with these lands now, and a little bit of projection into the future as well. I'm glad to report also that, for example, in the Resilience section, we have a young author, Kayla Delbar Moore, who, so it spans ages too. There are some very old folks who wrote stories for this book and some young people who wrote stories for this book. The majority of authors, I think I calculated it once, are women authors, are female authors. So once we got the stories in, we kind of shaped them into these three groupings of roots, transitions, and resilience in dealing with modern day challenges. So it was very organic. It didn't, it didn't follow from a preset pattern at all.
So you had stories from folks that maybe some are, and I know several are not, professional writers, but they poured out their heart and their soul and into their stories and their poems. How did you edit those while still preserving the integrity of the contributors' work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I got to give a lot of credit to University of Nevada Press. Of course, all of us on our central committee kind of read through these stories, read through all the submissions anyway. There were just a few that weren't quite in good enough shape that would have required a huge rewrite. So there were a few that weren't included in this collection. They were valuable, but they weren't quite ready for publication. But UNR Press assigned a professional copy reader to me, and it was wonderful to work with her. And then we also had one of our marketing and communications folks here at Humboldt go through and make editorial suggestions. It turns out that most everything was published in its original form. There was some going back and forth on Dave Daly's essay, but he stood firm that he wrote it in a certain way for a certain purpose, and it had been published that way before. So there weren't a huge number of changes, but it was amazing to work with a professional copy editor. That was a really good experience. And I think she was from the East Coast and had never really read things like this before. So she made some pretty good suggestions about how to make things a little bit clearer for a non-rangeland type audience, for their understanding, make their understanding a little bit clearer.
Is this the first time you've been through the compilation of a book such as this?
Yes, it is. This is the first time I've been through an activity like this. And as you get older, sometimes some people get set in their ways and some people say, the heck with it, I'm going to try something different. And I'm really glad that we launched into this project and that we persisted through it to its end. I've thought a little bit about maybe doing volume 2, because there's a lot more stories out there still, especially post-COVID. And no, but it was the first time and it was a lot of fun. It really was. Of course, being a professor, I've read a lot of material and done a lot of editorial work on student papers through the years, but I've never worked in this professional realm of a press. And even finding a press that would entertain such a prospect was an adventure in and of itself. It turns out that the person that, her name was Margaret, I'm forgetting her last name right now, but she worked for UNR Press. She picked this up and she said, yes, this is the kind of thing that we want to publish. We want to publish, authentic stories of people working on the land. I learned later on that she has since passed from cancer, but I'm glad that she picked us up and helped us work through this process. Bless you wherever you are, Margaret.
Were there any surprises in the submittals? Is there something there that, given your history of being a professor in rangeland science, was there something there in these stories about ranching that even surprised you?
That's a great question. I learned about range management, range science, and ecology at University of Arizona. I learned it in a very southwestern setting where most of the ranching families had been there for quite a while. They had had different interactions with indigenous communities, positive and negative. There were indigenous communities that were in the ranching business in Arizona and New Mexico. So coming back to California, coming back home, the stories are a little bit different, and even California has such a fascinating distribution of rangeland types and range people. I was surprised to learn about Mike Williams' operation in my home county of Los Angeles County. I insisted that there be a map in this book to show people, to show the readers where these ranchers were, because you may not imagine that there's a ranch in Los Angeles County, or that there are ranches right in the Bay Area, or there are ranches up in the extreme northeast corner of the state, like Kathy DeForest. Her story about predators was very heartrending. So I think I was surprised by the diversity of the stories. It wasn't as predictable, maybe, as you might find in other regions of the country that don't have the same landscape diversity as we do in California. California is a big bite. It's a big economy. I remember going to an SRM meeting some years ago in the Bay Area, and there was a lot of talk about innovation. This isn't in the book, by the way. But there was a lot of talk about the innovation on rangelands as far as buffalo cheese or ice cream or marketing to the restaurants in the Bay Area and stuff like that. And even that wouldn't transport up to Humboldt County or wouldn't fly in Modoc County, the kind of marketing that is done in that specific area. I mean, there's so much diversity in California. That was the big surprise. One of the people that I met through the book was Heather Bernikoff. And that was kind of a surprise because Heather Bernikoff and her husband were students at Humboldt State back in the day. Now it's Cal Poly Humboldt, but they were not in the sciences. But since going back to the foothills, she's really she's returned to her Native American roots, and she's involved in her community in conservation. So that was a very pleasant surprise, seeing somebody who came from the humanities going back in and learning more about natural systems and combining that with her own indigenous family history. That was great and very heartwarming.
This may be an unfair question, but were there any stories that jumped out at you at the beginning or maybe became your favorite in the book?
This is so hard to pick out two favorites, but I think that if you read Meadow Pasture by Jessica Schley a couple of times, better have a box of tissues next to you, because it's about her father. And it's just, Jessica just takes us to a different place. Her word choices and her cadence are so different that they kind of take you by surprise and really kind of choke you up. The other one, Linda Stansberry from up here, is a professional writer, but she grew up on a ranch out on the Lost Coast. And her funny story is definitely not funny. And you read the title and you start reading that. And then by the end of her short story, you're kind of left with, I don't know what kind of feeling, but there's tragedy there. So those two stories by some of our more professional writers, if you will, really struck deep.
And we're going to visit with Jessica a little bit later. We'll have a chance to learn more about her and her styles and her stories. What has been the feedback that you've received from the book since it's been released?
I've had a scattering of feedback. I don't think we don't know about impact yet per se. I think, so I'm going to take a deviation from your question here for a second. I think we'll get more about impact once we get some prompts and study questions for roots and resilience and get it into the classroom here. I'll be interested to see how the students respond to the California stories, to see if they're as magnificent as they were to the essays in Homeland. As far as feedback, I've gotten really nice email notes from former students and people who saw that, we had put this collection together and went out and bought it. And they'll write back and said, I had to stay up all night long. I read through the whole book. I think they're pretty captivated by it. Some folks that work in agencies, NRCS, have written back. Different former students, I think, have provided the most feedback. And the authors have provided feedback, too. They have been delighted to buy copies of the book and give them out at Christmas and give them for birthday presents and stuff. I've made some new friends. Tried to go and see Penny down in New Mexico when I was there, but that flight delays prevented that from happening. So just getting to know some of the authors a little bit better or meeting them face to face has been just delightful.
So you haven't tried it in the classroom yet, or have you?
No, we haven't quite tried this in the classroom yet. We're in a little bit of a transition right now at Humboldt where we're going to be looking for a new range professor. We're going to come out with a job announcement for that very soon. And so we have a reset coming as far as the teaching of the range classes, the range class that will use this book. I think another place where we're going to get feedback, and I'm really proud about this, is that Society for Range Management is going to have their annual meetings in 2026, the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists in Monterey, California. And we will have a booth in the trade show where the Humboldt Range and Soils Club is going to handle sales or donations for these books. And so I am really eager to share these with the rest of the Society for Range Management. That's kind of the inward-looking audience that we're looking at. The other thing that I'd really like to see in terms of who its intended audience is, there's a couple of intended audiences. One is our classes here at Humboldt and anybody else that wants to use this book. Second audience would be, our professional society and network, California Rangeland Trust, the California Rangeland Conservation Coalition, and so forth. But the third audience that I don't know that we've quite hit the mark with yet are what I think of as the museum or centers, bookstores. If you go to, for example, the Steinbeck Center in Salinas, I'd like to see our book there. I'd like to see our book in the Autry Museum bookshop, where people from the general public go to learn about art or literature or history. I would like our book to appear in more of those kinds of locations. And I don't think it's quite gotten there yet. So that's something that we should really push for in 2026, this very special International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists.
I love that idea, and we will do what we can to assist in that. We had a couple of the authors, Marilyn Russell and Jessica Schley, do readings from the book at a couple of Rangeland Trust events. And the feedback and the reception that we received was incredible. People were really touched by the stories, particularly hearing them directly from those who wrote them. And getting that word out there, it's great that we're telling these stories or sharing these stories with folks in ranching or closely related to that, or hopefully soon into the students at Humboldt. But getting them out there to those who don't understand or have a different perception of what it takes to steward these lands and the challenges and the blood, sweat, and tears that go into providing those open spaces, those working lands. That is really incredible and so needed.
I think it's a huge challenge too. I think I read a statistic the other day that said that only 16% of Americans, or some incredibly low figure like that, only 16% of Americans actually read books. They listen to podcasts, thankfully, which is great. But I kind of hope that among some of our young people, there'll be kind of a backlash to AI. I am, and I don't mean artificial insemination there.
A whole different thing to us.
Yeah. A backlash to this, to stuff that is manufactured for your mind. Rather, I hope that people will say, no, I'm going to read something authentic. I'm going to read something that a person with a pulse and a family and bills to pay wrote that I can relate to. I hope that, they will embrace originality from real human beings down the road. And Humboldt tends to attract those kinds of students, I would say. And I know there's a lot of folks out there. And so that's an audience I hope that will enjoy this book as well.
Well, the feedback and the praise that you've received so far has got to make you feel incredible. You've put a lot into compiling this book and making it happen. And it's been, from our perspective, what we've seen so far, it's been incredible. And like I said, folks are so touched by it. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier in our conversation, what's on deck for the next version, or where do you want to go from here?
Gosh, that's just to reflect back on your compliment there. It's humbling, and it's a wonderful feeling to have a shared product, to be able to put together a collection that consists of the works of many. I just wrote a little bit in the foreword. So being able to share with a bunch of great people is the best feeling of all. I think it would be very easy to compile another collection of stories, easy in the sense that there are folks out there who have read this book and who are inspired by it and who would like to contribute their own story, because there's a lot more stories out there. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen. I think somebody needs to put their hand out, maybe in Monterey at the SRM meetings, to say, hey, let's shake on volume 2. So that remains to be seen. I got a lot more free time on my hands these days, which is wonderful. So bring it on, people. If you want to do another volume, let's do it. But some people have to step up and say, I'm in.
Well, Roots and Resilience Volume 1 is a great inspiration for folks to do so. How do you see the preservation of the ranching stories that are in the book in regard to land preservation and conservation for future generations? What's the nexus there?
I think in this country that oral histories and family histories are highly valued. I think Ancestry.com is incredible in terms of how it shares family histories and documentation. I think that the NPR series on StoryCorps is very popular, where people come in and record their stories, and they're situated in the Library of Congress. I think it's very important that ranchers and other land managers guard their data, if you will. I'm speaking as a scientist right now. Guard their data and their stories and their observations very carefully, because if people have any wits about them, they will look back to these stories and these recollections and these data to understand what happens on the land and how to properly manage. People need to understand the perturbations that come with seasons and generations, the long-term cycles of insects and weather and plant invasions and things like this, to properly manage these lands and keep them in a healthy state, in a healthy and resilient state. So I think that's hugely valuable. understanding that this is a good grass year, or this is the year when the caterpillars came or whatnot. And so preserving these stories are a really important part of land management and land stewardship for the future. Dan Macon did write one essay in the book that's very important for our perspective, and maybe this addresses your question, Michael, a little bit better. His story is called Long-Term Stewardship in a Short-Term World. We have to take the long-term view for our survival as a species and for the benefit of those species that we steward. So I think the stories are part of that data record, if you will.
So, Susan, thank you so much for spending some time with us today and sharing the behind the scenes work on Roots and Resilience. We really appreciate everything you've done and your work up at Cal Poly Humboldt. And I know that this means a lot to you as it does to us. So thank you so much for sharing your time today.
I was so gratified to spend some time with you all too.
We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Susan. And as promised, we're now joined by Jessica Schley. Jessica currently serves as the chair of the Rangeland Trust Legacy Council. After experiencing the loss of her own family's ranch in Santa Barbara County, she has dedicated much of her free time to supporting the work of the Rangeland Trust. When it came to selecting contributors for Roots and Resilience, Jessica was a natural choice. She wrote 3 pieces for the book, and since its release, she's been invited to speak at numerous events to share her story even further. We're fortunate to have Jessica as part of our strong community of supporters, and we're grateful she's sitting down with us today. With that, here's my conversation with Jessica. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Jessica Schley to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's an honor.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about who Jessica is, your background, the ranching history of the family. Tell us a little bit more about who Jessica Schley is.
Well, I grew up on a multi-generational working cattle ranch in Santa Ynez Valley of California. It's the ranch that my grandparents owned and my father grew up on. I come from a ranching background. My grandfather's family owned a rather large ranch in central Colorado, where he grew up. My grandparents met in the 1920s and bought a ranch in Santa Ynez where that was their home ranch where they raised their 4 boys. And they traveled back and forth from that ranch to a couple of ranches they had in Arizona by plane. Part of my grandparents' courtship was that my grandfather taught my grandmother how to fly and helped her get her pilot's license. So they would fly back and forth. They actually had a charter airplane business where other ranchers would charter them to fly them back and forth to their ranches, including the Vail and Vicker family. So there's a really cool multi-generational connection to Nita Vail with my family. So, so my dad was raised on the home ranch in Santa Ynez, where I also grew up. My grandfather was killed in World War II. So after that, my grandmother continued to raise her boys at the home ranch, but we let go of the Arizona ranches and the Colorado ranch. So I didn't grow up knowing those places, but a few years ago, actually got to visit the Trinchera Ranch in Colorado for the first time, which meant a lot because I've got I grew up hearing family stories about it, and I've got some wonderful 100-plus-year-old photo albums of my grandfather's childhood there. And it's a very special place. It's got a lodge that people can book to visit, and they can do hunting excursions and hiking excursions. And it's under a conservation easement, which is a huge deal to me. So as far as my own story, I was a really nosy little kid, and I used to listen in on the adult conversations. And when I was about 10 years old, I overheard the family talking about how when grandma dies, the ranch will get sold and the money will get split up between the brothers. And so it immediately became my mission in life, my life's purpose, my life goal to save the ranch, quote unquote. And that wasn't a very healthy thing thing for a 10-year-old kid to be burdened with. The adults in my life didn't really know that, because I had eavesdropped. So, but anyway, it became my mission, and it led to me finding out as a teenager about the California Rangeland Trust and Nita Vale. And I knew Nita and the Vale family, I guess, through my family history, but not well. I knew who she was, but I don't think she knew who I was. At any rate, I ended up going to UC Berkeley and getting a degree in land and water conservation policy. I took most of my courses through the College of Natural Resources. I met Lynn Hunsinger and James Bartolome, and studied rangeland ecology. And I thought that having a degree in conservation would sort of legitimize me in the eyes of my family, who I needed to advocate to try to save the ranch. Ultimately, I was unsuccessful in that pursuit, and there are a lot of reasons for that. And after many years of therapy, I understand now my role in the larger picture, and that it wasn't really the right thing for a 10-year-old to, make her life's purpose. But I don't regret it, because it did give me a larger purpose in my life that is really profound. So at any rate, in about 2014, it was a couple of years after we'd lost the ranch, Nita reached out to me and asked if I would like to be part of the Legacy Council. And of course I said yes, and I have been part of it ever since, and it has meant a great deal to me. I think that she perceived that I was a bit rudderless, had lost my sense of purpose, which I think is something that she really, truly, deeply understands as someone who lost her family ranch and then helped create the California Rangeland Trust as a result, and then put her whole life into that. So I served on the Legacy Council, and then eventually Angelo Genasi asked me to co-chair with him. So I served as a co-chair for about a year, and then he passed off the reins to me so he could focus on being on the board. So that was a great honor, and I've been the chair of the Legacy Council ever since, and it means a great deal to me. So,
well, we're glad that you're part of that and a very valuable member of the Legacy Council, and the advice and support that the council members, you in particular, give the organization is incredible.
Thank you.
And very grateful for Nita, who's, for those who don't know, is our former CEO and one of our founding board members of the Rangeland Trust. And having her connection to you has paid off great dividends for all of us. And your passion for land conservation is very clear, and in the history that you shared with us. And so thank you for not giving up on that mission in life, because it's so important, and we appreciate that immensely.
I think for me, what has been the most powerful is that I thought that I had failed in my mission. And what it turns out, I guess the reason why I wanted to be part of the Legacy Council and why it meant so much to me to get invited was because it changed my identity from feeling like I had failed to now I just don't want anybody else to go through what our family went through. And if I can help the Rangeland Trust help keep ranchers ranching, then that means that I didn't fail, that I have a direction to take.
Not by a long shot. So now circling to the Roots and Resilience book, how did you get approached to be a contributing author to the book?
Yeah, so in my life, all roads lead to the Rangeland Trust, because that was also something that you guys were involved with. I think Alyssa and Nita actually reached out to me in 2019 and said, Susan Marshall has this book that she's putting together. It's a collection of writers writing about ranching. And we would like you to, we recommended you to Susan. So we'd like you to submit a few pieces. So I submitted 3 pieces, 2 which I'd already written, and 1 which I wrote specifically for the book. And to my great surprise and pleasure, all three were accepted. So yeah, then it took a few years because of COVID and a few other things, I think, before the book was published, but it got printed last November, which was really exciting. And it's been kind of a trip ever since, all the things that have sprouted from that.
It was a long process, submittal, acceptance, the editing, the publication, and then you get that book in your hand and you open it up and you see your submittals. How did that feel?
Totally amazing. My parents were both writers, and they owned a newspaper. So I grew up on the cutting room floor of the newspaper. And so I've been published before in newspapers and magazines, but this is my first time having a byline in a book. And it meant a great deal because it's stuff, it's writing that I really care about. I care about everything I write, but this is the topic that's the nearest and dearest to my heart. So it was a big honor. And Pam Doiron, her work in it is amazing. Everybody's work, it's just astounding. And there's such a wide variety of stories and poems and essays that are shared. So it's wonderful to get perspectives from so many different kinds of ranchers in California.
So someone who has done writing before and had some stories already done, you said you wrote one specifically for the book. How did you decide which ones to choose? That seems like could be a daunting task.
I wish I had a great answer for that. I don't really remember. I think I just went through some of my my work and thought, I don't know, it was almost like throwing pasta at a wall. Let's see what sticks. I thought, well, I'll be lucky if one of these makes it. And it turned out all three. She liked all three. So, yeah.
Well, it's very clear why. They're excellent pieces.
Thank you so much.
So when you're writing, how difficult or how easy is it to take your experiences, your history, and your passion and putting that on paper? How hard or easy does that come to you?
The process is different each time. Sometimes a phrase will kind of jump out at me while I'm just driving or in the shower or riding my horse, and I have to stop and write it down or put it in my phone and come back to it later. Sometimes it feels like, I don't know, a brick wall, like it just hits me and I have to stop what I'm doing and sit down and write the whole thing. And it just comes out the way it comes out. That's happened occasionally where I really change very little after I've written the whole thing. With the case of Meadow Pasture, I actually don't remember writing it. It's about my dad, and I wrote it 4 months after he passed away. I got up one morning and poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at my desk at home to start my work day, and it was up on my screen in a Google Doc. I must have gotten up in the middle of the night or written it before I went to bed. I had no memory of writing it. So there it was. And actually that I really did edit very little of that. And then, some of it is a painstaking process because it takes me through an emotional gamut. I don't know if you can tell, but Michael, you know, you've seen me cry a few times. I'm a very emotional person. And that can be really alienating to some people. I totally understand that. But what I have found out from the public readings that I've done now, in March at the Lobero Theater as the prequel, I guess, to the film screening for your wonderful film. The book signing that I did afterwards, which I didn't know, by the way, that you were going to have me do. You just sort of ushered me to the back to the reception and said, "You're going to sign some books now." And it was a thrill. Oh my gosh. But anyway, so many people came up afterwards saying that what I shared, what I read aloud, really struck them emotionally and really resonated with them. And it resonates with me. You know, that's why I write it. It's like emotionally healing. It's helpful. I've had a lot of therapy and been through like the cycles of grief a lot, but I had no idea that my writing is so impactful to other people. So
we had people come up after that reading there at the theater, and say how your experience and you're sharing that firsthand. It's one thing to read it, but it's another to hear it directly from you and from your heart and how that touched them. So I know that it could be hard to stand up there and share those words verbally, but Jessica, it was amazing what the impact you had on folks. And I think you're seeing that now with other opportunities because it's something that means so much to so many people.
Thank you. Yeah. It means a great deal to me. My writing helps me, but if it can help other people, that's a huge deal to me.
So what news stories are you working on? Anything that you want to share a glimpse for?
Yeah, I got cold called by the folks that run the Cowpoke Fall Gathering in Loomis. Actually, as a result of having recorded a poem for you guys. So again, all roads lead to the California Rangeland Trust. You guys asked me to do a recording of one of my poems, and you shared it with some donors. And then as a result of that, I got a call requesting that I be one of the 4 performers in November in Loomis. So that's a huge deal to me. And so it's a 2-night show, 260 seat house. And they asked me to do 2 readings or 2 performances each night. So I have 2 selections that I've already written. And then they requested that I do, they said that humorous works go over really well with their audience. And this is, by the way, the 31st anniversary of their annual gathering. So I'm actually working right now on one of the 2 pieces, and it's about my grandmother passing away, which doesn't sound like a humorous thing, but grief is part of apparently everything that I write, even if it's supposed to be funny. And the funny part about it is that I conspired with the hospice nurses to bring my mare inside of my grandmother's bedroom to give her a chance to pet a horse and, before she passed away, and a whole cascade of very intense and, in retrospect, very funny things happened as a result of that, including a manure stain on the carpet. So that's what I'm working on right now. So I can't wait to share that one.
So Bert and Carol Braun, which are great supporters of the Rangeland Trust, put on the Cowpoke Gathering. And having gone for a number of years on the opening evening before the 2 main events, it's really a special event. And to be asked to be part of that is pretty special. And you're in good company. There's amazing performers that come from all over the country to share their experiences and their talent with the audience. So that'll be exciting. And I will be there the first night and look forward to seeing you perform in person again.
Great. Wonderful. Well, Michael, being asked to be on this podcast with you already made me nervous enough because it's my first podcast recording, but I think you won't mind hearing that sharing a stage with Dave Stamey makes me even more nervous than I was before. He's an idol, an icon, and amazing.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah, so really, really excited.
Well, it's not just Cowpoke you get to perform. Where else? There's another big stage that you're going to be on after the first of the year. What's that one?
So there's a local cowboy poet, Chris Henricks. He performs at the Alisal for the breakfast rides and for other great events. And he's been an advocate, a supporter, an admirer of my writing for a long time. And so whenever I run into him, he gives me a stern talking to about how I need to be a writer and I need to take my writing more seriously and I need to apply to the Elko Cowboy Poetry Gathering. So because he's a wonderful performer, when you guys asked me to perform, to do a reading from Roots and Resilience in March for the documentary film screening, I called him and asked him if he would give me, coach me a bit, give me some, pointers for, just help me brush up on my public speaking. So he did that, and he did a great job. And then he said, under no circumstances should you not apply to the Elko event this year. I will never forgive you if you don't. I might never speak to you again if you don't. So, and the deadline was only a few weeks away. So it was good timing. And so kind of because of the boost, the wind in my sails from how wonderful that event went in March, I applied and then heard back that they wanted me at the event. So
that's so cool.
Yeah.
How does that feel? Now you get the Cowpoke, you've got the National Cowboy Poet Gathering. That's got to make you feel pretty darn cool, for lack of a better term. You tell me how that makes you feel.
It reminds me that going with the flow, sort of taking an opportunity when it presents itself and just going with it is, I guess, the way to do life. If I had in fact, I think I did put on my to-do list like a decade ago, write more, get published, get in a book. And I didn't, that's just not how it works. So when you get an opportunity, when an opportunity like getting to submit for Roots and Resilience falls in your lap, you go with it. And then all these other things have, sprouted from that. So I don't know, it does feel amazing. I don't know. In some way, it feels like I'm starting to fulfill the purpose that I was meant to fill.
Well, Jessica, to give listeners a little taste of Roots and Resilience, why don't you read, and this is what Susan Marshall noted as one of her favorites of the book, Meadow Pastures, the poem about your father.
Sure. I will try to make it through without cracking my voice or crying. Okay. Earlier this year, my father crossed through. I saw him go on an old red ranch horse of his, backdropped by a broad white barn back that blinds your eyes at sunrise despite its whitewash fading, like it does every sunny morning of every day of the year from dawn to noon. His horse marched onward eagerly, though light blind, as was his confident custom in my father's gentle hands, working the cricket in his old Bisalia bit, the one with no conchos or flair, just an old ranch bridle that worked and was well worn. My daddy tipped his hat to avoid the sun blindness, and just as trustingly put his faith in what neither the horse nor he could actually see ahead. It hardly mattered. They both knew the way, and that view from the ridge behind the barnyard corrals would be worth the squinting and guessing as they made their way through the sunlight up the mare trail to the top of the hill. He passed on through the hand-built, 20-foot-tall, dirt-rust, redwood plank-reinforced steel gate frame at the back of the branding corral. The crossbar stood high enough above the gate that it was safe to ride through without ducking. But just like he always paused and bowed his head before sitting in a church pew, my father also always genuflected passing through that gate, hand on the latch as if on the crest of the pew. From the branding corral through the old, slowly swinging, sturdy iron gate with rusty bolt hinges that sang in their grunting, came the view of the gentle middle pasture, the one our family saved for our mares in foal, the protected jewel at the center of the ranch, with the mellowest of swales and always thickest with shooting stars and chocolate lilies, a brook running through it, and plenty of oak nooks in the meadow for hiding foals in. The gate closed behind him as he passed on out of the corrals with his sorrel horse, and afterward came that loud, reverberating, all-knowing final clang. It's the kind of sound you know the meaning of when you hear it. I saw him go. I watched it, and it was very slow. His horse's head, though carefully attentive, hung low. The cattle stopped grazing. A passing coyote pondered a far-off smell, head tipped in the direction that the old horseman was headed. The old wide oak at the back of the corral was silent, but I could feel a warm breeze beneath her leaves, and yet, in turn, a sad chill under the branches hanging closest to my cheeks. An ancient oak within a square corral is a fitting enough foyer for me, and as that man I knew rode through those old gates and up that hill, backlit by the sunrise, I leaned into the shoulder of that rough-barked tree. for one brief moment, 1 second in eternal time, a kind, warm hand squeezed my shoulder, and I knew it was my father. And my dirt-coated, tear-stained cheek sank deeper into the gnarly, thick bark of that tree.
Jessica, if that doesn't touch somebody, they have no soul.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
What do you hope that listeners or readers take away from that story or any of your stories or poems?
I hope it helps remind them of their connection to the land. We're all connected, whether our family owned a farm in Minnesota that got sold 4 generations ago. We all used to be connected to the land, whether we can't remember or didn't or don't know whether we had a family history in ranching or farming. Even just having a garden means you're connected to the land. We eat 3 times a day, so we need to thank farmers and ranchers 3 times a day. And so I hope that what I share helps connect or reconnect people to their roots, just like the title of the book says, because it's super important not to lose that connection. I think that that's what impacted me the most, hearing the audience members' feedback at the book signing was that they wanted copies of the book to share with their family members. Some of them even said they wanted copies to share with their children because they want their kids to feel as connected to the land as they do. And some of them said that they wanted to share it with their parents and their aunts and uncles because they wanted them to know how deeply connected they feel to the ranch that they live on.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Folks get a chance to see you at the Cowpoke Fall Gathering in Loomis in November, and then the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, beginning of 2026. It's exciting for you, and we're so grateful that you took time today to share all of this and pour your heart out to our listeners. It means a lot to us, and your involvement and support and passion for the work that the Rangeland Trust does. It means so much to me personally and all of us in the organization. Jessica, thank you so much for being part of this today.
Thank you so much, Michael. It means even more to me than it does to you. Have a great rest of your day.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Tune Into the Land, and we're so grateful to Susan and Jessica for joining us and sharing their stories. As we mentioned, we were honored to play a small part in the creation of Roots and Resilience. In addition to Jessica's story, the book also features a few other Rangeland Trust partners: Pam Doran of the Spanish Ranch, Dina Moore, Teal Cody, and Lauren Sizemore of the Lone Star Ranch, Marilyn Sagehorn Russell of the Sagehorn Russell Ranch, and Jack and Lauren Varian of the V6 Ranch. If you'd like to read their stories and the stories of other ranching families from across California, you can pick up your own copy of Roots and Resilience through the link in the show notes. Every purchase supports the California Rangeland Trust, with a portion of the proceeds going directly to our work. And if you'd like to hear Jessica share one of her stories live, join us at a Western Affair on October 4th at Rancho Santa Barbara. It's sure to be an unforgettable evening, celebrating California's ranching families and working landscapes, with a ranch-style dinner, lively dancing, spirited auctions, and more, all under the Santa Barbara sky. Tickets are still available at rangelandtrust.org/a-western-affair. You can also see Jessica perform some of her new pieces at the Cowpoke Fall Gathering Cowboy Poetry event in Loomis, California, November 6th through the 8th. Tickets go on sale on October 1st. That closes the gate on another episode of Tune Into the Land. We want to remind you that your feedback matters, so please share your thoughts by leaving a comment or a review. Let us know what you enjoyed, what topics you'd like us to dig into, and your suggestions for future guests. Don't forget to hit that follow button to ensure you're notified when the new episode drops. To learn more about how you can support our mission, visit our website at rangelandtrust.org. There, you can make a donation or check out the Get Involved tab to learn more about upcoming events and conservation projects. Thank you for listening, and until next time.